this is our No Nukes Action's 83rd monthly 11th rally. Today, unfortunately, the Sunday, Japanese Consulate is not operated. But we are here always 11th of a month to protect the policy of the Japanese nuclear weapon and power, and the US is the same. 74 years ago, this is August, yes, for Japanese and also I think American people. Never can forget this month. 74 years ago, USA dropped indiscriminately massacre of citizens. Atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Two different kind of atomic bomb, as if these are experimental. And in Hiroshima, 140,000 people in the year 1945, and 70,000 people in Nagasaki in the same year. Total about 210,000 people vanished, and including the injuries, about 350,000 people are killed and injured by atomic bomb in the same year in 1945. America never be prosecuted as a war criminal, but this is totally inhumane against humanism. This indiscriminated killing of civilians, it is really have to be prosecuted as a criminal. And this year, Abe went to Hiroshima and then spoke something that I never understand that. He said that Japan country have to be the bridge of the nuclear weapon country and non-nuclear weapon country. I still don't get it. What does it mean? Instead of he signed for the nuclear weapon ban treaty, he's really supporting for the America. And then this Trump administration, this last month, let's see, June, yes, they disclosed the nuclear report, which very aggressive stance that the nuclear weapons in Obama's age that using for the how do you call for the guarding the nuclear war, which is Obama said we don't use in the first attack. If there are first attack, then we're gonna use. But then this Trump administration said we can use as the first attack. That is more efficient for the victory. And also he is prepared already for the small head nuclear warhead. So those are easy to use, much easy to use, are ready to be used. And also they are prepared for the called atomic soldier. The soldiers prepared, is ready for fighting under the mushroom clouds, which is ready to ready to fight in the field of the nuclear radiation field. Do you know the lesson of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki is we never have nuclear war, but really for this world's condition right now, and especially Trump's aggression, I feel very bad that someday, very near future, those atomic bomb might happen. And let's see the Fukushima. Let's look at the Fukushima. Let's see, Fukushima's situation is not really improved. It is still in progress, in ongoing. That even after like 7 months, the last meeting was 7 months, so that 7 months, the government had some conference that how do we do this condition, and then the conference came out nothing. They couldn't decide anything. For example, for the 1,100,000 tons of those contaminated water in the tank, they still don't know what to do. And then from now on, if they could retrieve the melted fuel, then they have to make those places to store in the site. There is no space to do that, so that just problem is accumulated. They wanted to release this contaminated water in the Pacific Ocean, but many fishermen around there are opposed. But I think eventually it will happen, because there are no place to go, and then instead of spending those money for the resolve this very hard, the first time in the human history, is in a 3 melted down. Those decommissioning process, instead of putting money, those work and then compensate all the victims who are still suffering, they are putting money to the Olympic for the next year. Do you know that this month, after August 1st, 45 people died in Tokyo by heat. The most of them are senior people, but it's very hot. Even the construction of the stadium worker died by heat stroke. So that just even having the summertime Olympic in Tokyo is like really abusing the athlete. But besides that, additional that, radiation level in even Tokyo is not safe. Any detect any level of the radiation is not safe for any people. But Japan start from those torch from Fukushima, and then game in baseball and softball. That's in Fukushima. Behind the new stadium in Fukushima, there are forests and woods. Constantly they are blowing from the forest. The wind brings the radiation material. If the rain or typhoon, these areas are not safe. But anyway, Japan using those Olympic to advertise and then covering up that saying Japan and Fukushima is safe now. We can even make Olympic. We can do game in Olympic. Kids are very happy there. Even has more than 200 thyroid cancers. People are coming back to the area because government decontaminated. That's a lie. It's still not safe. And then government want to cut the compensation so that they are bringing people back to the area. We totally oppose this type of policy. And then clearly Japan is stepping, I could say, backwards or forwards, whichever, to the militarism. And the good thing was, Taro Yamamoto giving the very fresh wind to the Japanese people, making more people interested into the politics. Even just a few months ago, July, the upper parliament seat election, actually the Liberal Democratic Party lost like 8 seat or 10 seat, and then doesn't make to the 2/3 of the seat. So that's good, but Abe, how do you go, tribute to the victory, he said he thinks it's a victory because many people supported the Liberal Democratic, but shamefully, this is the second lowest vote in Japan history from the World War II. Second lowest history means more than half people didn't vote. But Taro Yamamoto is maybe changing the Japan society and politics. I really feel thank you for him.
So this is the 83rd time that we have been here in front of the Japanese consulate in San Francisco. It's over 8 years since the Fukushima man-made disaster, which continues. And this continued need for water to cool the rods, the melted rods. There are 1,000 tanks surrounding Fukushima with over 1 million tons of tritium contaminated water. We went there earlier this year and found that there were bags, hundreds of thousands of bags of contaminated radioactive material spread out throughout the Fukushima prefecture. Imagine telling people they should go back home when there are bags of radioactive waste in front of their homes. This is what the government is telling people. This is real madness, that the government would actually tell people it's decontaminated, go back to Fukushima, and you have bags of contaminated waste in your neighborhood, in front of your house. It is total madness. Now, Prime Minister Abe is not going back to live there, but he did make a 2-hour trip, a staged trip in front of Fukushima Daiichi plant. And he went for 2 hours and then he took off and said it's all safe. But this lie that the government is putting out that Fukushima is safe is being seen more and more by people as a criminal lie, because it's not true that Fukushima is safe. It's not true that it's been decontaminated. How do you, as Chizu said, how can you decontaminate an area where the cesium is in the mountains? And when the cesium, when there was rain, we were there, you get contaminated. The rain comes down on you and it contains radioactive material. There are other people who say that radiation is okay, you can overcome radiation. We interviewed a liberal democratic politician who was running in Sendai. He said, we can overcome radiation. Well, no, you can't overcome radiation. This is something that people get, and they get contaminated. And of course, the children, young people are much more likely to be affected, their genes and everything else, by radiation. So the other thing that is happening is the crazy, insane trade war that's developing, not just between the United States, between Trump and Russia, and Trump and China, and Trump and other countries around the world, but now between Japan, Abe, and against the Korean government, because the Korean government ruled that Japanese companies like Mitsubishi had to compensate workers who were slave laborers in Japan during the Second World War. And the government now is whipping up trade war between Japan and Korea, and this is going to hurt the Japanese people, it's going to hurt the Korean people, it's going to lead to a world depression. That's what trade war leads to. But what is really behind this? What is behind this is there's an economic crisis of capitalism. That's really what's behind this. And the solution historically has been, when you have a crisis in capitalism, blame the immigrants, blame the Chinese, blame foreigners. That is the answer. That's the reason we're having this economic crisis. And that's exactly what Trump is doing, and the Democrats who support this trade war. We don't want a trade war between the United States and China. We don't want a trade war between Japan and Korea. Who will that benefit? It will hurt working people. It will hurt poor people. It'll hurt the people who need to have an environment where things can grow. So they're destroying the world economy is what they're doing, and at the same time they're crushing dissent. And yesterday in Hokkaido, there was a protest of 100 people against the police in Japan who were arresting people and taking down people who were protesting Abe when he spoke there. I mean, in other words, if you shout something against Abe at a rally, they arrest you and take you away. This is more like a dictatorship, repressive thing, and it's not just there, it's here. And we have to speak out against nuclear power plants. We have to speak out against war and threats of war by these governments. This is an attack on all of us. And the government of Japan, the Abe government, knows that what they're doing is untruthful. They know that people are being contaminated. They know that it's dangerous, but they don't really care. I read that 3 companies now want to develop more nuclear plants in Japan. Well, why is it that Prime Minister Khan and Koizumi are against more nuclear plants? The reason is they know that another nuclear disaster like Fukushima could destroy the whole country. We cannot afford, the Japanese people cannot afford another meltdown, and neither can the American people, because where is this water and the million tons of tritium water going to go? The government wants to release that water in the Pacific Ocean. If there was a major earthquake, there was a 6.3 earthquake last week in Japan in the Fukushima area, a major earthquake in Fukushima would immediately probably rupture those tanks, those 1,000 tanks that surround the plant. And as has been said, the Olympics are going to be in Fukushima as part of whitewashing by the government. The government wants people to believe everything's safe, and they want to have the plant. So we're calling on the world, countries in Germany, all over the world, to pull out of Fukushima, to show that this is a danger, that people should not be going to Fukushima, to show the lie that is. And the fact that the International Committee is allowing that is they're in collusion with this Abe government. So we have to say, stop the restarting the nuclear plants. No more Fukushimas. No more forcing the families and the children back into Fukushima, which the government is demanding. And we are going to continue this and continue and continue. Our voices will not be silenced. So it's important that we stand up, that we be heard, and we join with people in Japan. There were a demonstration a couple of days ago at Prime Minister Abe's house of people protesting militarization, protesting war. Well, we stand with our brothers and sisters in Japan who are protesting war and militarization and trade war. We understand that our enemies are not the people of Korea. Our enemies are not the people of China. Our enemies are not the people of Japan. They're right here, the people running this government. Trump is the enemy, one of the enemies, by his racist tirades against African Americans, against Latinos, and for more nuclear plants. Trump wants to get good nuclear weapons going, small nuclear weapons that they can spread out. What kind of insanity is that when we have people dying in the streets of San Francisco? They can't get health care. We're going to spend more money for nuclear weapons? There's an industry, it's a business behind this, as is the nuclear industry, and they really don't care that people are not being served in society. They're looking for more profits. So no nukes now. Stop restarting the nuclear plants. No more Fukushimas. No more Fukushimas. No more Fukushimas. Our next speaker is going to be Professor George Wright, who has done a document on the Fukushima and also the Olympics there, and is an expert.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I'd like to read from some notes I took this morning. One, Japan has been the poster child for the horrors of nuclear power. Japan is the only country that has been bombed by another country twice, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. What this did was usher in the ominous and frightening nuclear age that we still live under. We also must take note that the United States did not have to bomb Japan to end the war. The claim was that if they didn't drop the bombs, the war would have gone on for months and months. and a number of American troops would have been killed. But that's not the case. It was clear in the history books that the Japanese government was very, very close to surrendering, and all that was needed was dialogue and communication between the United States and the Japanese government at that time. So what did we draw from that? If the war was going to end without dropping the bombs, why were the bombs dropped? Gar Alperowitz has explained very clearly in his important book, Atomic Diplomacy, that the United States dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki as a statement to the Soviet Union that the United States had military supremacy over the Soviet Union at the end of the war, and that the United States was not only prepared to use the bomb, they used the bomb. So it was really a statement to the Soviet Union. Also, the United States wanted to get the war over quickly to prevent the Soviet Union from declaring war on Japan, so that the Soviet Union would play a role in the post-war negotiations over what countries had influence in Japan at the time. We see a parallel development in the Korean Peninsula that we're still living with, and the uncertainty of the outcome still exists. Certainly by 1948, the Soviet Union had an atomic bomb, and within the next 3 or 4 years, both countries had detonated hydrogen bombs, and that opened up the Cold War as we understand it. I'm sorry about this. I'm gonna have to edit that. The second point I want to make is that with the end of the Cold War in 1991, most people in the world felt or feel that the world is safe from nuclear war. Well, I'm going to disagree with that position. And in fact, I think it's fairly clear to those who are observing what's going on geopolitically around the world is that humanity today is closer to a nuclear war than we've been since 1962, which was the October missile crisis. And in fact, one of the differences between today and then is that you had two rational or semi-rational people in power, Kennedy, who was semi-rational, and Khrushchev, who was extremely rational, and both of them prevented World War III from happening at that moment. The problem in the United States is I see no one, Democrat or Republican, that is rational on the crisis that humanity faces, just the opposite. To explain why, since 2002, the United States has unilaterally withdrawn from two major arms control treaties. One, the ABM treaty, which Bush Jr. pulled out of in 2002, I think it was 2002, and Trump has this year pulled out of the intermediate range nuclear missile treaty as well, which opens up the door for increased arms race that has unfolded. Secondly, why we're in such a danger is that Obama and Trump have committed themselves to embarking on a 10-year, trillion-dollar so-called modernization of the U.S.'s nuclear arsenal, which has forced the Chinese government as well as the Russian government to increase their nuclear capabilities. More on that in a moment. The third thing that makes the world more dangerous is that the United States not only is developing so-called modern nuclear weapons, but is also talking about using tactical nuclear weapons in the various battlegrounds or battlefields that the United States is involved in. I mentioned a moment ago that this is provoking a nuclear arms race. In Russia in the last several years, and this was announced last March of 2018 by President Putin, that the Russians have hypersonic weapons to counter any nuclear attack on the part of the United States, which is a defensive or deterrent position on the part of the Russians, but also that is intensified U.S. hostility towards Russia. The third thing I want to say is that Russiagate is insane. What Russiagate is about is a cover to try to create in the United States a public opinion to justify the ongoing demonization of Russia, as well as to demonize the Putin government. There are multiple reasons why this is being done, but the central problem is that the United States geopolitically is its imperial or hegemonic position that it's had since 1945 is in rapid decline, and two major countries in the world, China as well as Russia, is in the ascendancy. And what that would move to or go towards is, rather than a unilateral world dominated by the United States, it will move to a multipolar world that the United States is not willing to accept. And therefore the tensions and hostilities driven by the United States towards China and Russia only intensifies. Steve mentioned about the so-called trade war against China. That is not just an economic war, that is a war aimed at trying to break the Chinese regime at this point, to force China to be a puppet or client state of the United States, just as the United States would like Russia to resume the status and the role that it played in during the Yeltsin years in the 1990s. The second major attack on Japan from a nuclear position was not a bombing by another country. The attack that Fukushima represents an attack on Japan as well. But this attack was caused by a combination of the Japanese government, the nuclear power industry in Japan, the international nuclear power industry, General Electric, who built the nuclear power plants at Fukushima, as well as the International Atomic Energy Agency. This time, this attack is real and ongoing, and it will only intensify because of the inability of preventing the containment of the nuclear radiation that is being emitted from the nuclear plants in Fukushima. To finish all of this, the insanity of all of this is represented by the fact that the International Olympic Committee chose in 2013 to give the Olympics to Tokyo. When members of the IOC asked Prime Minister Abe at that meeting in Buenos Aires, is Japan safe from radiation? He said, we've got it all under control. But it's 7 years later, and we realize that not only that the Japanese government does not have it under control, the crisis is much greater than we thought it was going to be. At the same time, the Abe government is using the Olympics in Tokyo next year as a distraction from the crisis of nuclear contamination in Japan and in the waters of the Pacific. Contamination has already reached the United States. The other thing on the intent of the Abe government is to try to tell the international community that everything is back to normal, investments can continue, and tourism can be resumed in Japan. But the problem is things are not back to normal, and we're facing an enormous crisis owing to Fukushima. No more Fukushimas. No more Fukushimas. No more Fukushimas. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So our next speaker, thank you, George, and I think his pamphlet is going to be coming out, and we're going to hopefully get it translated into Japanese, because people around the world need to know, how did the Olympics end up in Fukushima in Japan? And that's what one of the things his pamphlet deals with, because if we're facing a disaster now in environmental disaster now in Japan with the deaths of people in Japan from heat stroke, think about what it's going to be like next summer in Japan in August. Much worse. And that's what the United States is.
I want to add a comment about the date the Olympics will be held next year. I think they're going to start around August 10th through about the 25th, 26th, something like that. I attended the the IAF World Track and Field Championships in Japan back in 1991. And those competitions started, I think, about August 25th. They ran into September. I can attest that my experience there was probably the hottest time that I've ever experienced in my life. A typhoon came through Tokyo one evening, and the next day I think the temperature was about 100, and the humidity was about 100. The conditions next year will be just as bad and perhaps worse in Tokyo. But why did the Tokyo 2020 committee choose to have the Olympics in August? Well, the reasons why is that the International Olympic Committee has an ongoing set of contracts with NBC Universal, which provides the bulk of the television broadcast revenue that the International Olympic Committee receives. For example, in May of 2012, the IOC signed a contract with NBC for $7.4 billion to broadcast every Olympic game from 2022 through 2032. So there's a lot of money involved in this. When the organizers of the Tokyo Olympics wanted to have the games in late September or October, they were told by the IOC that NBC did not want that because that would interfere with their fall programming. Well, what is their fall programming? It's football, okay? That is why the games are going to be held in August. It's simple as that. Now, if you go back and look at the 1964 Olympics, which were held in Tokyo, they were held in October, by the way, okay, when weather is a lot calmer and cooler. So blame NBC and the International Olympic Committee for the deaths that that will occur next year at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, George. And this obviously has to be an issue, and it's another reason the Olympic athletes need to speak up, and people who support sports, because why subject yourself to possibly deadly conditions? Runners, open stadiums. The stadium they're building in Fukushima is open. So people are going to be sitting in very, very bad conditions. So our next speaker is another professor, Roger Scott from San Francisco City College, and he has been active in supporting solidarity between Japanese and American workers and is against militarization in Asia. So welcome, Professor Scott.
Good afternoon, folks. I don't have too much to add to the learned comments of my comrades, but I'd like to make a few observations and then share a letter with you. Japan has been the site of terrible lessons for the rest of the world. The bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the nuclear disaster in Fukushima. The world hasn't learned enough from those terrible lessons as we should have, just as we haven't learned enough regarding the nuclear disaster to deal with it. The working people of the world, I think, understand this, but too few political leaders do. There's no question in my mind, and I think in the minds of most people, that nuclear disasters like the bombs that are much more powerful now than those dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the nuclear disasters that can occur like Fukushima, they're irredeemable. There's no way that the land or the people can be rehabilitated. It's an absurdity and a grotesque future for the world, for the planet, unless we make serious changes. And not many political figures are doing that. There are some, and some great young people involved in both of these efforts. Recently, I got a letter from Yamamoto Sensei of the International Labor Solidarity Committee of Doro Chiba, and I wrote this response with relation to the measures that the Abe administration now is trying to take against Korea, the Korean people, over these trade issues that Steve mentioned. Dear Brother Yamamoto-san, I share the view that the Japanese government has consistently and shamefully refused to accept responsibility for the 36 years of oppressive colonial rule over the Korean Peninsula and for waging war against other Asian countries and committing atrocities and many other crimes against humanity before and during World War II. The Japanese government also supported U.S. aggression in Vietnam and continues to support U.S. intervention and destabilization on the Korean Peninsula. The Japanese government should oppose having 28,000 U.S. troops and the THAAD missile defense system in South Korea. The large number of U.S. troops, that missile system, and the other military exercises that are going on now are clearly major impediments to the peaceful reunification and denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. The Abe government has a moral and human obligation to support peacemakers, not Cold Warrior interventionists and corrupt politicians who are more loyal to the U.S. government and military than to the Korean people. That also applies to the Abe government being more loyal to Trump and a terrible administration than to the Japanese people. I join in solidarity with the International Solidarity Committee of Doro Chiba and people of goodwill throughout the world in denouncing the Abe administration's imposition of retaliatory export restrictions against South Korea and the cynical attempt to justify this form of economic warfare against the Korean people by trying to revive the ethnocentric hatred and ultranationalism of the fascistic past. The working people of the world stand with you and our Korean sisters and brothers in this important struggle for social and economic justice. Also in your courageous struggle against the Abe administration's attempt to revise the Constitution to eliminate the Article 9 peace provision. The people of Japan and all countries need peace and economic democracy, not war. In friendship and international solidarity, Roger Scott. I added a P.S. I don't get many opportunities to say something good about Prime Minister Abe and his counterparts in the U.S. and other countries, but I did notice that Prime Minister Abe met with Iranian leaders to discuss buying Iranian oil when the Trump administration and warmongers in his cabinet and administration, warmongers who are working very hard to become war criminals, are trying to bully other nations to boycott Iranian and Venezuelan oil. Thank you.
So as you know that our Alari, each time we are asking somebody to write to Prime Minister a very fresh letter. This time there is only one plant. Thank you. Both of these. In California, operate the power plant is Diablo Canyon. Diablo Canyon announced that 2023 or 2025 they're gonna finish 5 those nuclear power plant, but mothers in peace. Those people wanted shut down the Diablo Canyon sooner as possible. So still working very hard. And Carol Hisasue is one of a member of this Mothers in Peace. And she wrote to Prime Minister Abe this time. She cannot be here today, so Yoko Clark will read out.
Hi, friends. Hi. So I'm reading this letter that Carol wrote because she can't be here. So what she says is this. To Prime Minister Abe, you're either delusional or deliberate liar. In the past national elections held on July 21st, you declared victory. However, the LDP actually lost 10 seats. How you consider this a victory and a show of public support for your administration is a mystery. What it does show is that despite the exceptionally low voter turnout, your party and the administration are out of favor. And no wonder. We're seeing a more militaristic Japan that has ever existed following World War II. The average citizen's needs are ignored, while corporations, special interest groups, and those you favor are reaping all the rewards. Poor people are being bullied by your policies. Pensions are cut while taxes go up. Money is spent on military jets that a peace-loving nation should not have. The will of the people of Okinawa, wanting reduction in the U.S. military presence, means nothing to you or your administration. All the while, you are playing brinkmanship with Korea, a friendly neighbor playing right into the hands of those who seek instability in Northeast Asia. Most unforgivable of all, you are desperately trying to rewrite our constitution by 1. Restoring the position of the emperor to actual head of state rather than a symbol of the country, reverting to the Meiji-era constitution, Article 1. 2. Eliminating Clause 2 of the Article 9 completely and creating a bona fide armed forces. 3. Prioritizing national interests over respect for the individual, Article 12. 4. Limiting our freedom of assembly, association, speech, and secrecy of communication, Article 21. Letting the government determine, quote, family values, unquote, Article 24. 5. Eliminating protection of our basic human rights, Article 97. 6. Allowing for complete dictatorship in time of emergency, Article 98. And 8. Eliminating the need to uphold the Constitution, Article 102. For the sake of peace, the stability of Japan and the region, for the sake of your citizens, I implore you to resign. You have done nothing but harm Japan and its image. Have we not suffered enough for the folly of past militaristic leaders? Have you forgotten the images of Hiroshima and Nagasaki 74 years ago? We need a prime minister and government who puts its citizens first and work to become a leading nation again with eyes on the future rather than the past. One that sees the only way to energy autonomy is to shift to renewables 100%. One that recognizes that Japan is too seismically dangerous for even one nuclear reactor. One that will not lie to the world about Fukushima being under control, quote unquote, and endangering young athletes with an ill-conceived publicity stunt called Tokyo Olympics. One who will not take Japan back to its dark past. One who is a true diplomat and peacemaker. You are not the one, Mr. Shinzo Abe. Do the right thing and step down now. Carol Hisasue, Los Osos, California.
Shut down all the nukes!